Hi, everyone. This is Aaron Larson, executive editor of Power Magazine, and you're listening to the Power Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Dagmar Thien, who is managing conventional island equipment for nuclear power plants with Siemens Energy. So, Dagmar, thank you for joining me. Please tell a little bit about yourself and about what you do with Siemens Energy.
Well, yeah, thanks for the interview. I'm a physicist by heart, and I joined Siemens, predecessor of what is now Siemens Energy, 20 years ago now. And when I did that, actually, one of the first things I saw here in the factory was the power train going out to Olkiluoto 3 nuclear power plant. So it has been part of my working life from the beginning, on and off until now. What is Siemens Energy? That is really, as you were mentioning that also, Siemens Energy, global leader in energy technology, and that also includes components for nuclear power plants for the conventional island.
And it seems like the nuclear industry is really on an upswing right now. From your perspective, what's the biggest driver behind all of this new optimism, and do you think it's going to last for the long term?
Well, number one, I think one of the huge drivers actually is just simply the power demand, which is increasing all over, and specifically in terms of electricity demand. Then, of course, renewables need some baseload grid support whenever there's no wind, no sun, and nuclear just is there when it's there, and it keeps operating no matter of the climate and the weather. And reliable power really is a point. And also in terms of what is maybe a bit different now in terms of what you call the upswing. If you think of the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of nuclear, that's quite an interesting technology. And so I think given all the reliable power, for example, also for data centers, etc., probably it's going to be lasting for a while.
And there's a lot of different types of reactors and scale out there. We've got gigawatt scale reactors, and small modular reactors are really becoming a more popular item. And even micro reactors, the small ones, 1 megawatt to 20 megawatts. So which do you feel is most poised to take off in the market, and why?
Well, I think you mentioned the different sizes in terms of scaling. So I think the larger nuclear power plants are going to be always part of the mix and are also going to be on the rise, just simply because here, as in any kind of power plant, the larger the plant, the lower the specific cost is. So I think those are going to be there. And as I said, with a lot of rise in electricity needs, there will be a need for large power plants. So then what is being discussed in terms of the small modular reactors, the modularization, standardization topics, which are being pushed out of that range, are also aiming to reduce the specific prices, the capex, euro or dollar per megawatt. If that is really going to be the case, or how much reduction that is going to be, will still have to be seen. It's definitely a promise, and for all I see, this is also going to be impacting the larger units positively,
Mhm.
because any standardization that you can think of for pieces of the supply chain is going to be helpful also for reductions for the larger units. So that is in terms of the sizing. So I guess larger ones and smaller ones, depending on the actual application, both are going to be part of the story. And then you mentioned that there's a lot of different types of reactors out there. What we've known up to now, largely the light water reactors, or also some few heavy water. Those are always going to be there. And of course, we do see more attention also towards other so-called generation 4 reactors based on potentially different fuel cycles, also based on actually different temperatures of the coolant outlet, and therefore also much higher temperatures that could be used for heat applications as compared to the water-cooled reactors, which are mainly out there right now. So speaking of carbonization thoughts and trying to replace high temperature applications, these are definitely going to be part of what's coming up, and we'll have to see who is going to make the race and how far.
Siemens Energy has been a long-time participant in the nuclear power industry. And can you talk about what you're doing to support the nuclear industry today?
Sure. So to make it really short and simple, as also in the introduction, so supplying turbine island, or sometimes also called conventional island. And so the turbos had also safety qualified INC to go with it. And of course, with all of those components, the maintenance and the service throughout the entire lifetime. And also, as has just been recently announced, and of course, restarting or helping restarting such components for nuclear power plants that had already been taken out of operation and are now coming back. So basically, if you think of the rotating equipment that is bringing the power from the heat to the electricity and all the services that go along with it and all the INC you need to operate it, that's what we would supply.
Mhm. And you already mentioned how many different types of new units are out there. We talk about light water reactors that have been around for a long time, but you also mentioned how there's high temperature reactors, high temperature gas cooled, sodium, fast reactors, molten salt designs. So with all of these different units, there are different steam conditions and different thermodynamic cycles. And what does that mean for you when you're designing turbine generator equipment and you're engineering these systems to work together?
Well, luckily, as I said before, we're an energy technology company, so we do have a lot of different types of turbines out there. And so if you look at these different reactor types, the thermal output varies, not only in the amount of power, but also the temperature and pressures of the medium. So there could be options, for example, for Rankine cycles or also some cases for Brayton cycles. So typically, the steam conditions vary very much between these different types, and that could lead to differences in Rankine cycle details. But if we look at our portfolio range in terms of turbines, and now I specifically just say turbines as opposed to steam turbines, based on the decades of heritage that we have in also combined cycle power plants as well as in nuclear power plants, then yeah, we have a large portfolio to support different types of reactors. And also overall, we support here, if needed, in an overall system optimization. So sometimes that can be very interesting for reactor developers to discuss with our experts to find an overall system optimization rather than having somebody optimize a reactor on the one side and somebody else optimizing, for example, a water steam cycle on the other side, but may not be an overall optimum. So we
Mhm.
could do this together.
And this may be kind of a redundant question, but with the different sizes as well, you have the small modular reactors and then you have the gigawatt scale plants. Are there other engineering changes or differences that you have to consider when you're working on these different scales?
Well, in general, as pretty much you already indicated, the general solution is the same. However, if you look at what is being basically required also from SMR developer side is a bit of a higher level of modularization and standardization. And so that is one of the differences that we see currently when we discuss with the reactor developers. But generally, what we see also, if you look back to nuclear history, nuclear power plant history, there are plants that, if you have a new design, starts usually small, which nowadays we would call SMRs maybe. And then over time, if it makes sense, they scale to larger megawatt outputs. And so then we would scale that along with our portfolio. So currently, more modularization, standardization with the SMRs, but that could go along as they grow if needed.
Mhm. And you mentioned how Siemens Energy also supplies the INC equipment, the instrumentation and controls, which are basically the brains of the plant. How does that factor in with the different designs? For example, when you're connecting something, an INC system to a high temperature gas cooled reactor versus, a more conventional or traditional PWR, what changes in those systems?
Yeah, Also here, in a way, it's pretty much the same. It's similar, like if you talk with your language, as we are talking now in English language, but if you talk in different contexts, it's the brain behind it, to use your image, is always the same. And even the language we talk, English now, is the same, but you use different words, different terminology when you, for example, talk to your colleagues or when you talk to your family members at home. And so, in a way, if you think about a PWR or, for example, high temperature gas cooled reactor, these type of reactors define the context. So there may be a couple of tweaks that are necessary where we have the interfaces to the reactor, and there may be a couple of tweaks that are necessary as there are, for example, differences between INCs for a gas power plant and a steam power plant. But in general, it's still the same kind of language. There's still the same kind of approaches.
Mhm. Data centers seem to be, the talk of the town these days. Everybody's building data centers and expanding and growing demand. And you also mentioned the fact that these units could be producing heat, for industrial purposes. So how do those types of applications affect the work that you do when it comes to nuclear power plant design?
Well, at Siemens Energy, it's kind of part of our everyday work to tailor the power plant solutions to the specific needs of a customer. So here also we do the same thing. So if some say, well, we just need electricity, and some others say, maybe we need not only electricity, but really reliable electricity, like the data centers. And some others say, "Ooh, well, but I have an industrial user here, or I have the town that I want to supply with the district heating." Then, of course, we also support those requirements. And there, again, for us, it's everyday work. And that is the same kind of question we get for also conventional power plants, depending on the end customer. And these adaptations are just standard for us. And we do them as we go, depending on customer requirements.
Sure. And I'm going to do a little name dropping here because I think it's been announced that you're working with Rolls-Royce SMRs, and I'm sure you're working with many other developers that are using designs that are in various stages of readiness, whether they're, still being developed or ready to roll out. But can you talk about the different technical requirements that go into this and what you're being asked to accommodate across these different projects?
Yeah, you mentioned one, as you said, really recent, interesting partner. And yes, we are in discussions with different reactor developers who are in also very early stages of their design ideas. And those who already have some kind of a power plant concept, but not yet any regulatory approval, up to those that are in very concrete stages of project development at specific sites. And so, as you might think, from the very, very early stages where there could be a lot more of our expertise needed to what is actually a power plant,
Mhm.
as to those where there is somebody who says, well, I need the following components, that's about the range of technical requirements that you could think of that we accommodate to.
I'm guessing when you work in different countries, maybe you have to accommodate the regulatory agencies as well. Do you get asked to submit specifics to different regulatory agencies in the US, for example, compared to the UK, compared to other countries?
Unfortunately, you're very right. Yes, there
Mm.
are different regulatory requirements in the different countries. And yes, there are differences that we are being asked to accommodate. Luckily, in many cases, they are at least somehow comparable. And also, nowadays, luckily, at least if you, for example, look at US, UK, Canada, the regulatory authorities are also trying to get closer to each other with their requirements because everybody knows that if everybody is doing something different, it would just enlarge the effort and therefore the cost. So, yes, there are differences. And yes, there is luckily still a lot of things that are very similar and can be
Right.
reused.
When we look back to that December article in Power Magazine, I think it noted that there was about 23% of the world's reactors that use Siemens Energy INC systems. What's the modernization story there? Because I'm guessing a lot of these units are older and may need upgrading. How do you go about doing that at existing plants?
Yeah, you're very right. There are differences in the age of the power plants and therefore also, of course, in the INC systems. Upgrading of the non-safety qualified functions, like turbine controls, is comparably easy, even after long times, and that's done regularly. If we talk about safety qualified components, then the effort is significantly higher. Some of them even have to remain functional during a shutdown of the power plant. So the current process follows obsolescence management, ensuring that the components remain available. And when a component or systems are no longer available, then we develop replacement solution or modernization with a permanent focus, of course, on maintaining the qualification granted by the authorities, as you mentioned before, very important. So this means that specific demonstrations have to be performed to ensure that at least the same level of safety is in place with the modernization or the replacement solution. And yeah, if you have an idea, if the effort's done, for example, in the aerospace industry for obsolescence or car industry, then you have an idea of such work. So if a component is not available and your plane remains grounded, then if you take that to nuclear power plants, the reactor would not go back into operation. So the customer would not be happy. So there's a lot of effort. And yes, we do that if needed.
How do you balance that standardization on one hand with customization on the other? And what does that mean for timelines?
Yeah, so in general, you could think that there's really actually groups of different steam conditions. So luckily, not everybody is doing something completely different, and you could actually group them. So in that sense, we do apply a certain way of standardization, which in that sense is that we have specific portfolio elements that could be used for a range of steam conditions. In that sense, what delivers the steam conditions that we need to talk about? And of course, on the heat side, it's basically the reactor that gives us the indication of this is the steam conditions I deliver to you. And then, of course, then it's the cold end, which is the site-specific conditions, which then says, can we use this or that portfolio element, or do we have to adapt for much more cooling or less on the cold end? So but that has always been the case. So, I mean, even from the earliest days of steam turbines, you have your heat provider on the one hand, and you have your cold end on the other hand, and you always have to adapt to that. So, we have our portfolio elements, which we can use for more than just one developer usually, and then adapting that to the specific sites is just typical steam turbine engineering work.
One area we haven't touched on yet is service and lifetime support. And as the industry looks to extend the life of existing nuclear plants and even restart facilities that were previously decommissioned, like the Palisades plant, how important are lifetime extensions and modernization and long term service in enabling this nuclear upswing? And what role do you see Siemens Energy playing in making those projects viable?
Yeah, as said before, service and lifetime support are really very essential to the nuclear renaissance and not just new reactor builds. For one hand, because any nuclear power plant that is already there and you want to keep on operating for longer, it's already there and you don't have to worry about building and having all the build times. So that's why a lot of the nuclear power plants which are in operation now are considering lifetime extensions. And of course, for the conventional island equipment, we support on that end. So modernization of steam turbines and generators, control systems helps those nuclear power plants then also not only run longer, but also safely and reliably for, yeah, I mean, even in the US, for example, we see these very significant lifetime extensions,
Mhm.
discussing 80 years or even longer. And then the modernizations, usually we try to go along that way with the reactor, improving performance, reducing downtime without building something new. So you mentioned Palisades, a landmark example demonstrating that even the decommissioned plants can safely be recommissioned with the right engineering people. And yeah, typical upgrades, if the reactor also gets an upgrade, and then even if the reactor has more or less same output, we can tweak on the hardware side and control systems. So then we would increase efficiency and power output just by adding new modernized steam turbines and generators.
All right. Well, Dagmar, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast and talking about all of the capabilities and all of the things that Siemens Energy is working on. Is there anything that I haven't asked about that you feel would be important to mention before we wrap up?
No, I think that was a very encompassing set of questions. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll just have to see which of these upswing or renaissance, depending on who you ask for, what is going to be coming along.
All right. Again, for listeners, I've been speaking with Dagmar Thien, who is managing conventional island equipment for nuclear power plants with Siemens Energy. Again, thanks for your time, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Aaron. It was a pleasure.